Montana Territory, 1875. The dying light of autumn cast long shadows across the weathered porch of the Pine Creek Ranch, where Levi Porter stood watching the distant trail that cut through golden grasslands. At 25, he had already carved a life from this untamed country. 1,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, and a sturdy cabin built with his own hands. By frontier standards, he was successful. By his own measure, he remained incomplete. Levi leaned against the rough-hewn post, his tanned face youthful despite the weight of responsibility etched in the slight furrow of his brow. A cool breeze ruffled his dark brown hair as he adjusted his worn leather vest over a clean white shirt, a concession to the day's significance. No sign yet, called Jackson Miller, Levi's grizzled ranch hand, emerging from the barn. Nothing, Levi replied, scanning the horizon. Mail coach is late. Jackson chuckled. Mail coach ain't never been on time since '68. Levi nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere. 6 months of letters exchanged with Elizabeth Pennington, a young woman from Boston seeking a new life, had culminated in today. The arrangement was practical. She needed security. He needed a wife to help manage a growing ranch. Love was a luxury for people in settled places, not something that survived in harsh country where nature could take everything in a single brutal winter. The West demands practicality, Levi muttered to himself. Not sentiment. It was the belief that had guided him since his parents' deaths 5 years earlier. He'd watched his father wither away from grief after losing his mother to fever. Levi had sworn never to let himself become so vulnerable. Attachment was weakness, and weakness killed in the territories. Yet as the distant rumble of coach wheels broke the stillness, Levi felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. He straightened his collar, brushed dust from his trousers, and descended the porch steps. The stagecoach appeared over the rise, thundering toward the ranch in a cloud of dust. As it drew closer, Levi could make out a figure in the window, a pale face framed by what appeared to be light-colored hair. His pulse quickened despite his determination to remain detached. The coach lurched to a stop. Dust billowed around the wheels as the driver called, "Pine Creek Ranch. Last stop." The door swung open, and a young woman emerged, steadying herself against the coach. Elizabeth Pennington stood before him in a blue traveling dress, golden blonde hair partially contained beneath a modest hat. At 22, she appeared both weary from travel and alert with apprehension. Her delicate features betrayed no immediate disappointment at the sight of him, which Levi considered a favorable beginning. Their eyes met across the yard. Something unexpected passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never seen each other's faces before. "Mr. Porter?" she asked, her voice carrying a refined Eastern accent. "Miss Pennington," he replied, stepping forward. "Welcome to Montana." He offered his hand to help with her descent, and when their fingers touched, Levi felt a jolt that contradicted everything he believed about frontier practicality. Her grip was firm despite her slender fingers, not the weak handshake he had expected from an Eastern lady. "Your letters didn't mention how beautiful the land is," she said, gazing at the mountains rising against the sky. "It feels vast. Too vast for some," Levi responded cautiously. "The territory breaks more people than it welcomes." Elizabeth turned to him with unexpected directness. "Then we shall have to avoid being broken, Mr. Porter." As they unloaded her modest trunks, disaster struck without warning. The team of horses spooked at a rattlesnake slithering across the yard. The driver lost control as the coach lurched forward, sending one of Elizabeth's trunks crashing to the ground. It burst open, spilling its contents across the dirt. Levi moved to help gather her belongings, but stopped short at what lay revealed among the scattered items: books. Not just any books, but medical texts and journals, a small case of instruments, and various bottles carefully wrapped in cloth. "You're a doctor?" The question escaped before he could contain his surprise. Elizabeth knelt to collect her possessions, her cheeks flushing. "I am trained as a physician's assistant. I studied under Dr. Margaret White in Boston for 3 years. She paused, watching him cautiously. "I should have mentioned it in my letters, but I feared you might withdraw your offer." Levi stared at her in astonishment. The nearest doctor was in Helena, 2 days' hard ride away. Each winter, people died from treatable conditions simply for lack of medical care. "Miss Pennington," he said slowly, "do you know how many lives you might save here?" Her eyes widened, relief washing over her features. Then you don't object? Object. Levi shook his head. The territory needs healing hands more than it needs almost anything else. In that moment, as they knelt together gathering her scattered medicine bottles and books, Levi's certainty about emotional detachment wavered. Elizabeth Pennington was nothing like the wife he had imagined. She was something far more valuable to frontier life. That evening, they sat across from each other at his table, the lantern light casting a warm glow over their simple supper. Elizabeth spoke of her training, of the cholera epidemic that had claimed her parents and younger brother, leaving her alone to make her way in a world that rarely took women physicians seriously. Death teaches us to keep our distance from others, she said softly. At least, that's what I told myself when I boarded the train west. Levi recognized his own philosophy in her words. And yet here you are, a healer. You chose a profession that demands involvement with others at their most vulnerable. She smiled faintly. Perhaps I'm not as clever as I think. Or perhaps you're braver than you know, he replied. Later, as he showed her to the small adjacent cabin he had built for her, propriety demanded separate quarters until their marriage. Levi found himself wondering if his long-held belief about emotional distance might be challenged by this unexpected woman. The following weeks brought rapid changes to Pine Creek Ranch. Word spread quickly about Elizabeth's medical training, and soon, settlers from miles around arrived seeking treatment for ailments long neglected. Levi watched with growing admiration as she tended to a ranch hand's infected cut, set a child's broken arm, and delivered a baby in the middle of a thunderstorm. Their wedding date approached, still a practical arrangement in theory. Yet with each passing day, Levi found himself drawn to Elizabeth's quiet strength and unwavering compassion. He began to wonder if his fear of attachment might be costing him something precious. One evening, as they returned from treating a family stricken with fever in a distant homestead, their horses picked their way through gathering darkness. Elizabeth swayed in her saddle, exhausted from 20 hours without rest. We should make camp, Levi suggested, noting the heavy clouds rolling in. The creek ahead has shelter in a grove of cottonwoods. They dismounted in a small clearing beside the burbling creek. Levi quickly built a fire while Elizabeth unsaddled the horses. The ease with which they worked together struck him. No wasted words, just synchronized movements born of growing familiarity. You're a natural on horseback for an Eastern woman, Levi observed as they sat by the fire, sharing jerky and hardtack. Elizabeth laughed softly. My father raised horses outside Boston before we moved to the city. I practically grew up in a saddle until I was 12. She studied him across the flames. And you're surprisingly gentle with your patience for a hardened rancher. My mother was ill for years before she died, he admitted. I learned to help care for her. The conversation flowed easily between them, revealing layers neither had shared in their letters. When rain began to fall, they took shelter under Levi's oilskin tarp, sitting close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent in her hair. I've been thinking, Elizabeth said carefully, watching raindrops slide down the tarp's edge. Our arrangement has been presented as one of mutual convenience. But I wonder if we might hope for something more. Levi felt his carefully constructed defenses waver. The territory is unforgiving, Elizabeth. People who depend too much on others often end up destroyed when they're gone. Is that what happened to your father? The question struck like lightning. He loved my mother so completely that her death took the life from him long before his heart stopped beating, Levi said hoarsely. I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake. Elizabeth was silent for a long moment. My medical training taught me something different, she finally said. Those who heal fastest from injury or illness are invariably those with loved ones to return to. Isolation doesn't protect us from pain. It merely ensures we face it alone. Her words resonated uncomfortably with truths Levi had long avoided. As thunder rumbled overhead and rain pattered against their shelter, he found himself reaching for her hand in the darkness. I'm beginning to think, he said quietly, that I may have been wrong about what survival requires out here. The approaching winter brought harsh winds sweeping down from the mountains. Levi and Elizabeth were married by a traveling preacher in a simple ceremony attended by neighboring ranchers and settlers whose lives Elizabeth had touched with her medical skills. That night, as they stood alone in the main cabin that would now be their shared home, the formality that had characterized their interactions fell away. I never expected to find someone like you, Levi confessed, drawing her close. Someone who understands this life and makes it better by her presence. Elizabeth's blue eyes met his with unexpected vulnerability. I came west believing I needed only security and purpose. I never imagined I might find a partner who respects my calling. Their kiss sealed a covenant deeper than their practical arrangement had ever intended. As December snows isolated the ranch, they settled into a rhythm of shared work and growing intimacy. Elizabeth converted the small side cabin into a proper clinic while Levi expanded their living quarters, adding a stone fireplace and larger windows that she had admired in a catalog. Their contentment was shattered one frigid January night when pounding at the door roused them from sleep. Levi opened it to find Jackson Miller supporting a half-frozen stranger. Found him collapsed on the north trail. Jackson gasped, his breath clouding in the cold air. Barely alive. They brought the man inside, where Elizabeth immediately began treatment for severe frostbite and exhaustion. As she worked to save his fingers and toes, the stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about coming outlaws and warning the Porter Ranch. By morning, the stranger, who identified himself as Marshall Davies, was lucid enough to deliver his warning. Silas Reed is coming, he croaked, his face grave. He's gathered a gang, claiming you stole land that was rightfully his. Levi went pale. Reed sold me this land fair and square 3 years ago. I have the deed. He's saying you forged his signature, Davies replied. But it's just an excuse. He's heard about the gold found in the North Creek last fall. Elizabeth looked between them. Gold? What gold? Levi sighed heavily. I found color in the creek, but kept it quiet. Nothing worth mining commercially, but enough to supplement the ranch during lean years. He turned to Davies. How many men does Reed have? 7, maybe 8. Hard cases, all of them. They're 3 days behind me, at most. As Davies rested, Levi and Elizabeth spoke privately. You should take the stage to Helena tomorrow, Levi insisted. Stay with Dr. Halloran until this is resolved. Elizabeth's expression hardened. I will not abandon our home or our patients. This is my land too now, Levi. Elizabeth, these men are killers. Reed has wanted this property since he gambled away his claim to it. Finding gold gives him the excuse he needs to take it by force. Then we'll defend it together, she replied firmly. I didn't come west to run at the first sign of trouble. Her resolution both terrified and moved him. Levi realized that in just a few months, Elizabeth had become essential to him, not just as a wife or partner, but as the heart of everything he valued. Word spread quickly about the impending danger. Neighboring ranchers arrived to offer support, transforming Pine Creek Ranch into an improvised fortress. Elizabeth prepared medical supplies while showing remarkable skill with her father's old revolver, hitting fence posts at 30 paces with consistent accuracy. My father believed a woman should know how to protect herself, she explained when Levi expressed surprise. Though I prefer healing to harming. The night before Reed's expected arrival, as they lay together in their bedroom, Elizabeth turned to Levi with unexpected urgency. I need to tell you something, she whispered. Something I've kept from you. Levi felt cold dread wash over him. What is it? My name wasn't always Pennington, she said, her voice trembling. It was Reed. Silas Reed is my uncle. Levi sat up, staring at her in the dim light. What? After my parents died, he was my guardian until I turned 18. She hesitated. He tried to force me to marry his business partner, a man 50 years my senior. When I refused, he disowned me. I took my mother's maiden name and never looked back. Why didn't you tell me? Levi asked, his voice hollow. I wanted to leave that life behind completely, Elizabeth replied. And later, I feared you would question my motives in coming here if you knew I had a connection to your past. Do you think he knows who you are now? I don't know. But if he discovers I'm here, married to you. She left the implication hanging. Levi pulled her close, mind racing. The revelation cast their situation in a new light, one that transformed a property dispute into something far more personal and dangerous. This changes everything, he said grimly. Reed won't just want the land now. The following day brought leaden skies and biting cold. By mid-afternoon, the lookout spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the east. Levi stood on the porch, rifle in hand, with Elizabeth beside him. Their neighbors were positioned strategically around the property, determined to prevent bloodshed if possible, but prepared for the worst. 8 riders emerged from the tree line, spreading out in a menacing line. At their center rode a large man with a silver-streaked beard, Silas Reed himself. "Porter," Reed called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Time to settle our business." "There's nothing to settle, Reed," Levi shouted back. "I have a legal deed to this property, witnessed and recorded in Helena." Reed laughed harshly. "Paperwork don't mean much out here, boy, but I'm willing to be reasonable. You and your people clear out by sundown. Leave everything standing, and nobody gets hurt." Elizabeth stepped forward suddenly. "Hello, Uncle." A stunned silence fell over the standoff. Reed squinted, then his eyes widened in shock. "Elizabeth," he growled, "what in hell are you doing here?" "I'm Mrs. Levi Porter now," she replied steadily. "This is my home." Reed's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He cut himself off, turning to his men. "Change of plans. Burn it all. But the woman comes with us." "She's not going anywhere with you," Levi said, stepping in front of Elizabeth. What followed was a blur of violence and chaos. Reed's men charged the ranch while Levi's neighbors emerged from hiding. Gunfire erupted as Elizabeth retreated to the cabin, where she had prepared to treat injuries. Levi lost sight of her as he exchanged shots with Reed's men from behind a water trough. The fighting raged for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. 2 of Reed's men lay wounded, another dead. One of Levi's neighbors clutched a bleeding arm. Through the gunsmoke, Levi spotted Reed breaking from the main fight, heading for the cabin, where Elizabeth was alone. Levi sprinted across the open yard, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels. He crashed through the cabin door to find Reed holding Elizabeth at gunpoint. "Drop it, Porter," Reed snarled, "or she dies right now." Levi lowered his rifle slowly. "Let her go, Reed. This is between you and me." "It's always been about more than land," Reed said bitterly. "It's about taking what's mine." She was promised to Stanley Maxwell, a deal worth $5,000 to me, before she ran. "I was never yours to sell," Elizabeth said fiercely. Reed grabbed her arm roughly. "You'll fetch an even better price now as a widow." What happened next occurred so quickly that Levi would later struggle to recall the sequence. Elizabeth's free hand emerged from her apron pocket, holding a small medical syringe. In one fluid motion, she plunged it into Reed's thigh. The man howled in surprise, his grip loosening just enough for Elizabeth to break free. Levi launched himself at Reed, knocking the gun from his hand. They crashed into the table, medical supplies scattering across the floor. Reed, already unsteady from whatever Elizabeth had injected, fought with diminishing strength as Levi subdued him. "Morphine," Elizabeth explained, retrieving Reed's fallen gun. Not enough to kill him, but enough to slow him considerably. Outside, the shooting had stopped. Reed's remaining men, seeing their leader captured, had surrendered or fled. The danger had passed, but the reality of how close they had come to losing everything hung heavy in the air. As the county sheriff arrived to take Reed and his surviving men into custody, Levi found Elizabeth tending to the wounded on their porch. Her hands were steady despite everything that had happened. When she finished bandaging the last injury, he pulled her into his arms. "I thought I might lose you," he whispered against her hair. "You nearly did," she admitted. "But we're still here." That night, after the wounded had been stabilized and the dead buried, Levi and Elizabeth stood together on their porch beneath a sky brilliant with stars. The ranch had survived, though bullet holes riddled the barn and fences would need mending. "I was wrong," Levi said quietly, "about everything that matters." Elizabeth looked up at him questioningly. "I believe that safety came from avoiding attachment," he continued. "But today proved the opposite. It was our connections, to each other, to our neighbors, that saved us. Isolation would have been our downfall." "The frontier isn't conquered by lone wolves," Elizabeth agreed softly. "It's tamed by communities who stand together." "And love," Levi added, drawing her closer. "Not just practical arrangements, but the kind that makes a person brave enough to fight for something larger than themselves." As spring returned to Montana territory, Pine Creek Ranch flourished. Elizabeth's clinic expanded to serve the growing community, while Levi's cattle operation prospered. The gold in the creek remained their secret, used sparingly to help neighbors through hard times rather than invite more trouble. 1 year after Elizabeth's arrival, As they sat together on the porch swing Levi had built for her birthday, she placed his hand gently on her stomach. "By winter," she said with a smile, "there will be 3 of us here." Levi's eyes widened, joy and momentary fear battling within him. "Are you certain?" "As certain as my medical training allows," she laughed softly. He pulled her close, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. The ranch that had once been merely a place of work had become truly home, not because of the buildings or boundaries, but because of the woman who had brought healing to more than just his neighbor's ailments. "When you stepped off that stagecoach," Levi said, "I thought I was simply fulfilling a practical need for the ranch." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled in the fading light. "And what did you discover instead?" "That home isn't a place at all," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's wherever we're together." As twilight settled over the Montana landscape, Levi Porter, no longer the lonely cowboy who feared attachment, embraced the fullness of the life he had never dared to imagine. The harsh territory that had once seemed to demand emotional distance had instead revealed its greatest lesson, that even in the wildest places, the human heart could find its true home in love.